Good evening YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. I'd like to make a clip about what they call the red button argument. Now, in case some of my subscribers have never heard of the red button argument, it's a quote hypothetical thought experiment unquote cooked up by a bunch of people who call themselves EFILists. Alright? And EFILISM is, of course, life spelt backwards. EFILISM equals life backwardsism. And as the prime directive of life is to stay alive and to propagate, the prime directive of life backwardsism is to not propagate and, if possible, to stop all life. That's what EFILISM is, right? And they cooked up the red button argument, so you can imagine what the red button argument is about. And EFILists, they're pretty much the extreme fanatical end, or perhaps the logical conclusion, of a bunch of people who style themselves the Anti-Natalists. Alright, now anti as in against, natal as in birth. Anti-Natalism claims Schopenhauer as their founding patron saint because he reckoned life wasn't worth living. They have a more recent prophet in the form of David Benatar, who wrote a book called Better Never to Have Been, and Benatar claims that suffering is bad. Okay? The anti-natalists swallow that assumption wholeheartedly. They never question it. They assume that suffering is bad. They don't ever consider that suffering is a perception of a signal, which means go back, you are going the wrong way. A sucking chest wound is nature's way of telling you to slow down. If you're doing it hard, it means you're doing something wrong. Back off away from the acid and go towards the fresh water. Go away from the hot plate and have a drink of cold water. Eat some food. Suffering is an interpretation of a signal. Suffering is not an entity. Suffering is not a force. Suffering is not an inherent evil. However, the anti-natalists don't question it, they just accept it. Right? Swallow that one whole. Suffering is bad, absence of suffering is good. They go further down the track of ridiculous hyperbole extrapolated to, banana-headed lengths, with the theory that to prevent the suffering of a non-existent being by preventing that sentient being's conception, that is good, whereas preventing the non-existent sentient being's conception by preventing them from experiencing pleasure or joy or happiness, that is not bad. So however they want to dress it up in complicated algebra, they prioritise suffering as a more important sensation, interpretation of a signal, than pleasure, happiness, joy, satisfaction, just having an average day. I have stated and demonstrated in a previous movie called Observer's Guide to Anti-Natalism and Anti-Natalists, which actually won a prize in an anti-natalist movie competition run by an anti-natalist. How you going, Forever Wolf Films? Thanks for the t-shirt. As I stated in that, anti-natalism as an alleged philosophy only appeals to atheists who are depressed. Anybody who has a God theory worth praying to accepts that their God theory has a plan for life in the universe, and therefore whatever suffering sentient beings experience, there's a reason for it. Okay? So only atheists can be interested in anti-natalism as any kind of a serious idea. And it's not merely atheists, it's only the depressed atheists. Because atheists who are not depressed experience life as more than an endless flow of suffering. Alright, so you've got a ridiculously small proportion of the population who are interested in anti-natalism, but they are out there. Some of them are genuinely fair and well-meaning, and they want to dedicate their lives to propagating the meme of anti-natalism, the idea that life is so wicked that nobody should have any children and humanity should breed itself out of existence. Well, that's okay, that's a political belief. I don't mind much about that. The EFILists, the life backwardsisms, they are either the fanatical end or the logical conclusion of anti-natalism. They claim they are the logical conclusion. The rest of the anti-natalists, they apologise for the EFILists and say, no, they're the fanatics. They're not anti-natalism. They've gone too far. Right? But the EFILists like to talk about how if there existed a red button, a magic red button, which you could push in order to cause instant, universal, painless death, then would it be right to push it? Would it be right for the EFIList to make that decision for the good of all humanity, to end all suffering? Right? They're so far out along an extended chain of extrapolated logic built on faulty assumptions that they don't begin to realise how ridiculous they look, but that's where they're at. They're making YouTube movies and getting hot under the collar when everybody else, like Conference Report, hi Fred, how you going? Or Sage Bodhisattva, how you going, Sage? Loved that last video, bloody beautiful, mate. When people point out to them that they have no moral or ethical right to make a decision about ending anybody else's life because life is relative. What, to a Petit-Bourgeois, immature, infantile, spoiled, wannabe utopian grown up in an ever-expanding petro-powered economy, what they think is intolerable suffering, to somebody else might be a bloody good life. It's really interesting that all the anti-natalists and the EFILists that I've come across on YouTube are town and city bred. None of them actually live in nature, yet they like to talk about how cruel nature is. And as Sage Bodhisattva said, they've got bugger all experience of suffering. Forever Wolf Films, you talk about all the suffering you allegedly have seen. I used to work in a child minding centre. I've looked after 35 3-year-olds for 4 hours at a time for money. I got to tell you, when you're in a child minding centre, at a creche, at a big 650 bed hospital, the most screwed up kids there are the psychiatrist's children. Your mother's a Jungian analyst. All the time while you were a puzzle kid, she had you locked out of the room worrying about somebody else's troubles, because that's what paid the bills. I'd be willing to wager that most anti-natalists are prima facie afraid of being as bad at parenting as their own parents were. EFILists are having a temper tantrum. They are projecting their own hatred of their own life onto everybody else. They don't like their own life. It's not living up to their utopian expectations. They don't get to trash the planet the way their parents and grandparents did, because the planet's already been trashed. They are running up against growth limits and they don't bloody like it. So they're having a temper tantrum and they're fantasising about a red button. The magical red button which allows EFILism to inflict genocide on the rest of creation, of humanity. And we know about genocide. Genocide is evil and selfish and arrogant and immoral. If it's immoral and unethical for the individual, it is immoral and unethical for the society. If it's not right for one individual living in the street to decide that the postman is bald and his eyes are too close together and he looks too long and too hard at the young girls, so therefore he's probably a pedophile, thus and because we should string him up from a lamppost. If it's not right for one paranoid little old right-wing fantasist to kill the postman on suspicion, then it's not right for the Country Women's Association to debate a motion and decide that he needs to be killed on suspicion. And therefore it's not right for President O'Blah-Blah to be voted in by a tiny majority of the minority of American citizens who bother to vote, it's not right for him to decide to kill some poor bastard for sitting in a mud hut on the other side of the world and talking about what a bunch of fucking arseholes the Yankees are. And it's definitely not moral or legal or ethical for a bunch of Petit-Bourgoise spoilt brats having a temper tantrum to sit around fantasising about what a lovely thing it would be to have a red button. It puts them in the same category as the Einsatzgruppen who wandered around Poland and the Ukraine dispensing EFIListic ideology from pistol point, killing strangers on the advice of a politician in order to make the world a better place. EFIListic stormtroopers, the Einsatzgruppen, working for Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich. Oh, what wonderful company you're all in. Pol Pot and the killing fields. Day zero. Year zero. The Rwandan machetes. EFILism is genocide, and genocide is always wrong. I've really got to say that if you think you can make the world a better place by killing strangers for a political ideology that you can't sustain in any rational philosophical argument, all you can do is restate your platitudes, your slogans and your cliches. Life is suffering. Life is addiction. Suffering is pointless. It means nothing. Yet you want to kill the world on the strength of that. I got a better question for the EFILists. Rather than try and convince people that it's moral and ethically sound to push the red button, I want to know what proportion of an EFIList's income would they be prepared to devote towards buying a red button. Imagine you're walking down the street and you see a busker there, and the busker has two hats and one of them's labelled food, shelter and clothing for me and the other one is labelled red button R&D. You put 5 cents in the red button and $5 in his food, shelter and clothing hat? Or do you put $5 in his red button R&D hat and 5 cents in for his food, shelter and clothing? What proportion of an EFIList income would they devote to the R&D to build a red button, something that would release the KYAGS virus, the kiss your ass goodbye sucker virus? And at what point in the equation do they decide that they can't reduce the suffering anymore, but the virus is virulent enough? You know, like if the virus is going to be contagious but symptom-free for a month, and then suddenly exhibit symptoms and kill within 6 hours. How much suffering would an EFIList say that prevents versus how much suffering would an EFIList say that that propagates? Would an EFIList then spend the money and push the button? What if Bill Gates was an EFIList? How much spare money can he devote to building a red button to dispense the KYAGS virus? Kiss your ass goodbye, sucker. The EFILists may be in command one day. What does that make EFILists? A dangerous fucking lunatic fraction. That's what I think it makes EFILists. As bad as Hitler and as bad as Pol Pot. As bad as Stalin and as bad as Mao, but the difference is Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, they all had a reason to justify their shitty outlook on life. Stalin's left arm was shorter than his right because he spent a couple of years with his elbow bones sticking out through the skin because his father was a fucking drunk who beat the shit out of him. He had a reason to have that shitty outlook on life. I prescribe every EFIList in the world to turn up at your local casualty and request an optrectomy. This is a delicate operation to sever the cord connecting your optical cortex with your asshole, and after the operation you will no longer enjoy a shitty outlook on life. Ciao!